Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are taking a pretty dramatic plunge into the turbulent history of Chile. We're looking at 2 centuries, basically, from independence in 1818 right up to the big political shifts of 2021. And our mission really is to try and understand how this incredibly long, thin country, defined by its geography, also became defined by these wild political swings. We're talking conservative order, socialist revolution, brutal dictatorship, and then back to this, well, still kind of fragile democracy.
It really is a history of whiplash, isn't it? I
Yeah.
mean, you look right at the start. Independence kicks off around 1810, but Chile, as we know it, is really established in 1818. A lot of that was down to Bernardo O'Higgins. He was actually the son of an Irish noble,
Right.
and crucially, he had backing from the Argentine general San Martin.
Okay, so O'Higgins, with San Martin's help, gets the nation founded 16 regions, loads of islands, something like 120. But it sounds like the stability didn't last long at all.
No, not really. O'Higgins is out by 1823. He basically took on the establishment too directly, challenged the big landowners, the oligarchs, and the powerful clergy. And, well, they pushed back hard and forced him out.
So that conservative sort of centralist power base won out early, and that victory was sealed at the Battle of Lurkay in 1830.
Exactly. And that battle led straight into this long period of conservative dominance, which was then locked in by the 1833 Constitution.
Right, and that constitution sounds key. It wasn't just a document. It actively entrenched the power of the elite and kept things centralized.
Absolutely crucial. It created a really strong, quite authoritarian state, and this is where Chile picks up that nickname, which tells you a lot. The Prussia of South America.
That's always struck me as such an odd comparison. Was it purely about the authoritarian government, or is there more to it?
It was definitely the government's style, but it got, let's say, reinforced later by the military culture. Around 1885, Prussian military instructors actually came over. They basically reshaped the Chilean army and the German image.
You mean like uniforms and marching?
Yeah, the whole package. The
Right.
Stahlhelm helmet, the goose step in parades. But it wasn't just for show. It embedded this very disciplined, hierarchical, militaristic ideology deep within the armed forces. It made the military see itself as a guardian of order, ready to step in politically, which, as you know, they did repeatedly.
Okay, so that's a really important thread, this tradition of military intervention born way back then. We need to keep that in mind. But politically, things did shift a bit towards a more liberal republic from the 1850s, though the government was still pretty aggressive externally.
Oh, absolutely aggressive externally. That outward focus led straight to the War of Salpetre, or the War of the Pacific, from 1879 to 1884. And this war was huge for Chile's economy. They defeated Bolivia and Peru and basically annexed massive territories in the north.
Right, taking Antofagasta from Bolivia and Tarapacá, Arica, Tacna from Peru.
Exactly. And those lands weren't just land. They were packed with nitrates and copper.
So immense mineral wealth suddenly falls into Chile's lap.
Immense is the word. It catapulted Chile onto the global economic stage almost overnight. Huge wealth.
But even with all that money pouring in, the internal politics were still shaky, leading to the parliamentary republic in 1891. And that started violently, too.
Yeah, it kicked off with a civil war. The target was the liberal president, José Balmaceda. She tried to push social reforms, maybe nationalize some of the nitrate sector, which the British financiers and the local oligarchy hated. They fought him, he lost, and he ended up committing suicide.
And what came after sounds like total gridlock.
Pretty much. The Congress basically ran the show, dictating terms to a series of presidents who were more like figureheads.
I remember reading that one president, German Riesco, churned through 73 different ministers in just 5 years, between 1901 and 1906.
73. Yeah, it just shows you how weak the presidency was and how powerful and probably chaotic Congress became. It was the oligarchy really running things unchecked.
Yeah.
But underneath all that political maneuvering, something else is brewing.
The labor movement,
Yeah,
fueled by all that mining work.
exactly. The copper and nitrate industries created this huge working class, and they started organizing. You see anarcho-syndicalism popping up in port cities like Valparaiso, then more formal groups like the FOCH, the Chilean Workers' Federation, in 1919, and even the early Socialist Party, the POS, back in 1912.
But the response from the state wasn't exactly welcoming.
Welcoming. It was brutal. The 1907 Iquique massacre is it's horrific. Miners were striking, wanting to be paid in actual money, pesos, not company tokens. The army was sent in, and they opened fire. Around 1,600 strikers and their families were killed, just shot down.
1,600. That's not a crackdown, that's a massacre. An event like that must have just completely hardened attitudes, right? radicalize people.
Absolutely. It said a clear message. Peaceful change wasn't really on the table.
Yeah.
That kind of violence, that volatility, it eventually pushes things back towards a stronger presidency. The period called the volatile presidential republic, starting around 1925. Arturo Elizalde Palma came first.
But then power slipped again, this time to a military figure. General Ibáñez del Campo.
Right. Ibáñez imposed a dictatorship from 1927 to 31. He tried this big push on exports, nitrate and copper again. But then the 1929 Wall Street crash just wiped him out.
And the economic impact was massive.
Devastating. Like 2/3 of the miners lost their jobs almost instantly. The political chaos was intense. There was even this bizarre, short-lived socialist republic that lasted just 12 days in 1932.
Wow. So it took the Great Depression, that level of shock, to finally shift things towards a more stable coalition, the Front Populaire in 1938, kind of like Roosevelt's New Deal.
Exactly, inspired by the New Deal. And this period gives us this amazing little story involving two names that become huge later. Pablo Neruda, the poet, and a young doctor named Salvador Allende.
Oh, the Winnipeg story.
That's one. In 1939, Neruda and Allende, who was health minister then, chartered a cargo ship, the Winnipeg. They managed to get 2,000 Spanish Republicans, fleeing Franco's regime in Spain, all the way across the Atlantic to safety in Valparaiso. It's such a symbol of Chile's progressive internationalist streak at the time.
A really powerful moment. But that kind of idealism, it ran straight into the Cold War, didn't it?
Head first. The Cold War changed everything almost immediately. President Videla, elected in 46, actually had communist support initially. But by 1948, he completely turned on them.
And the Communist Party.
Banned them outright. The ban lasted 10 years until 58. It seems harsh, but from Videla's perspective, it was pragmatic. The post-war copper boom was over, Chile needed industrial investment, and the only way to get significant U.S. aid and money flowing in was to prove his anti-communist credentials.
So Cold War politics basically forced Chile to pick a side economically and politically.
Pretty much. And this really sets the stage for the next key figure before Allende. The Christian Democrat president, Eduardo Frei, who was in power from 64 to 70. He was sometimes called the Latin American Kennedy.
And his big idea was the revolution and liberty, trying to find a middle path.
Yeah, Frei was trying to thread the needle. He brought in cautious reforms, hoping to kind of defuse the growing pressure from the left without totally alienating the right. His big things were land reform, breaking up the really huge estates, the latifundios, over 80 hectares, and Chilenization of copper.
Chilenization.
Yeah.
Meaning the state took a majority stake, like 51%.
Exactly, 51%.
Yeah.
Not full nationalization, but state control. The problem was, in that incredibly polarized climate, this middle way pleased nobody.
So the right, the landowners, they hated the land reform.
Saw it as theft, basically socialist creep.
And the left, the socialists and communists, they felt it didn't go nearly far enough. They wanted full control.
Right, they wanted total nationalization immediately. So Frei's attempt at moderation just kind of collapsed under pressure from both sides, which perfectly tees up the 1970 election.
And the victory of Salvador Allende.
Allende wins, leading the Unidad Popular Coalition. But, and this is critical, he only got 36.6% of the vote, a very slim plurality.
But despite that narrow win, he moved fast and radically.
Immediately. Sweeping nationalizations, banks, major industries, and yes, copper, which the Congress actually voted for unanimously, interestingly enough. And alongside that,
Massive wage increases, like 40, 60%.
Well, while freezing prices.
yeah, designed to immediately boost working-class living standards. And initially, there was real euphoria, a sense of empowerment. But the economic consequences, they hit fast.
Overheating, massive inflation.
Massive. By 1972, inflation was already hitting 160%. And Ellen wasn't just battling the economy, he was facing pressure from everywhere.
Okay, so externally, you had Nixon and the CIA cutting off U.S. credits, right? Squeezing him economically.
Immediately. And internally. He had the conservative opposition, the Code E alliance, fighting him tooth and nail. But also, pressure from his left flank, the MIR, the revolutionary left movement who thought he wasn't moving fast enough, wanted armed struggle.
And then there were the strikes, paralyzing the country, like the truck drivers' strike.
Those were crippling. And widely seen as being deliberately stoked, funded even, by opposition groups and potentially external actors to destabilize the government. It was relentless pressure.
And we also have to mention the assassination of General Schneider just before Allende took office.
Yes, General René Schneider. He was the army chief, a firm constitutionalist who refused to let the military block Allende's confirmation by Congress. He was killed by right-wing elements, hoping to provoke a crisis and prevent Allende from taking power. Ironically, it probably backfired, solidifying congressional support for Allende in the short term, but it just ratcheted up the tension even further.
So you have this incredibly volatile mix. Economic crisis, political polarization, internal and external sabotage.
Hmm.
It feels like something had to break.
And it did,
We've
violently, on September 11th, 1973.
the coup, led by General Augusto Pinochet.
The very man Allende had appointed army chief just weeks before. Allende apparently had placed complete confidence in him. They were even fellow Masons. It was a total betrayal. The coup was swift, brutal. The presidential palace was bombed. Allende died inside.
And Pinochet immediately consolidated power, unleashing a wave of terror through the dime.
The DINA, the National Intelligence Directorate. His secret police, they became notorious. We're talking systematic terror. Estimates are around 3,200 people killed or disappeared, and at least 38,000 officially documented cases of torture. It was about crushing all opposition immediately.
Beyond the sheer horror of the repression, the Pinochet regime also had this huge lasting impact on Chile's direction, particularly economically, right? Fully embracing that authoritarian side we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. Pinochet became a linchpin in Kissinger's Operation Condor, the cross-border network of South American dictatorships hunting down dissidents. But economically, he turned Chile into ground zero, a real-world laboratory for the ideas of the Chicago Boys.
Right, the Chicago Boys. Explain who they were and what they did in Chile.
They were a group of Chilean economists, many trained at the University of Chicago under Milton Friedman, led by figures like Hernan Bucci later on. They implemented radical free market neoliberal policies with ruthless speed under the dictatorship's protection.
So what did that mean in practice? Privatization.
Massive privatization. State companies sold off. Deregulation. Slashing public spending. Breaking unions. Crucially, things like pensions, healthcare, education, huge parts of the social safety net were dismantled or handed over to the private sector. The state shrank dramatically.
And the results for ordinary people. The sources mentioned soaring inflation initially.
Yeah, inflation went crazy at first, 400%, even up towards 2,000% in the early years. And for the majority, living standards plummeted as those state supports vanished and inequality just exploded. It created the economic model Chile largely still has today.
So how did Chile eventually get out from under Pinochet? It wasn't quick or easy.
Not at all. It was a long, slow, dangerous process. It was really driven by grassroots resistance, the protestas, mass street protests that started picking up steam around 1983. But the repression was still intense. Dozens were killed in those protests.
Did any institutions push back?
The Catholic Church became increasingly critical and provided some shelter for human rights groups, which was important. But the real turning point was political.
The 1988 plebiscite, the referendum.
Exactly. Pinochet felt confident enough to call a referendum asking voters if they wanted him to stay in power until 1997. He expected to win. But the opposition, despite all the risks and intimidation, managed to mobilize a no campaign.
And the no vote won?
It won. 54.7% voted no. It was a huge shock to the regime and really the beginning of the end. It forced Pinochet to accept a transition, leading to elections in 1989 and the return to democracy in 1990.
So the post-Pinochet era from 1990 up to, say, 2021, how would you characterize that period? Stability, but maybe uneasy stability.
That's a good way to put it, uneasy stability. You saw power alternate between the center-left coalition, the consultation people like Patricio Aylwin, Ricardo Lagos, Michelle Bachelet, and center-right, most notably Sebastián Piñera.
And Piñera himself is an interesting figure, a billionaire businessman, Harvard-educated, initially seen as closer to the Pinochetist right.
Yes, definitely representing the business elite and the legacy of that Chicago Boys model, which puts him in really sharp contrast to someone like Michelle Bachelet on the center-left.
Right, Bachelet, a socialist, a doctor. Her father was a general tortured to death under Pinochet, and she herself was arrested and tortured. That personal history is incredibly powerful.
It's stark. You have these two figures representing completely different experiences of Chile's recent past, yet crucially, even under the center-left concertation governments, that fundamental economic structure laid down by Pinochet and the Chicago Boys, it largely stayed in place. There were social reforms, yes, but the core model wasn't overturned.
Until maybe 2019, when things just seemed to explode again.
Exactly. October 2019, it started over a small rise in metro fares in Santiago, but it tapped into decades of simmering anger about inequality. The cost of living versus frozen wages, the private pension system people hated, the expensive privatized education and healthcare, it all boiled over.
Massive protests, the Estallido Social, the sources even call it an intifada populaire.
Yeah, that term really captures the depth of the popular fury, the feeling that the economic model itself, regardless of who was in government, was fundamentally unjust and it left millions behind. Piñera, who was president again, saw his approval rating collapse down to just 7%.
And this wave of protests directly led to the election in 2021 of Gabriel Boric.
Directly. Boric was only 35, a former student protest leader, representing a new leftist coalition that explicitly promised a break from that neoliberal consensus. A radical departure, really.
So if we try to pull this all together, looking back over these 2 centuries, what's the persistent pattern you see in Chilean history?
It really feels like this constant grinding conflict. On one side, you have this deeply entrenched conservative oligarchy, often tied to land, finance, and the military tradition. On the other, you have this recurring progressive movement pushing for social justice, for workers' rights, for redistribution. And this internal fight is almost always shaped or distorted by outside forces, British money in the 19th century, U.S. political and economic ideology dominating the 20th.
And Chile seems left with these two very powerful, almost extreme legacies of imposed order. The military authoritarian tradition going way back to that Prussian model, and then the economic libertarianism brutally installed by the Chicago Boys.
They're like two pillars of Chilean conservatism, in a way. Which brings us right up to the present challenge, and maybe the final thought for you listening. Gabriel Boric came to power promising to fundamentally change that Chicago Boys model, to tackle that deep inequality, reverse privatizations.
But can he? That's the big question, isn't it?
Exactly. Can a new generation of leadership truly dismantle a system so deeply embedded, especially when you consider the enduring power of those military traditions and the economic cloud of the oligarchy, what some might call the lingering ghost of Pinochism? Or will Chile fall back into that historical cycle of polarization, conflict, and maybe even instability that we've seen play out time and time again over the last 200 years? That's really the drama unfolding right now.